American water polo.
Member from American Water Polo. We're here today with Josh Kratz to learn some of our best practices from experienced officials in our Behind the Whistle series. How you doing, Josh?
Good, Damon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started in water polo.
Yeah, so I started, I know we're local together. I went to North Penn High School, started playing water polo there after being a swimmer kind of growing up, and then played at Johns Hopkins University. I always liked kind of whistling in practice and whatnot. So our good friend Tom Tracy, who was the head of officials at the CWPA at the time, my senior year at Johns Hopkins, I had a conversation with him about how I could get into officiating. And he gave me some good insights and kind of put me on a path forward from there. So I picked up the whistle kind of right after college and started officiating some high school games and some local scrimmages. And then got some assignments into some college games, and it kind of took off from there. So yeah, I've been lucky with working with some great officials and being put in some great situations. And I do owe a lot to Tom and kind of getting me started in whistling games.
That's perfect. So how long has that been? When did you graduate? I guess I'm kind of dating myself. I have to think.
Yeah, so 2009 was my last playing year. So
Okay.
it's been about 10 years
Yeah.
whistling. So it certainly feels like less than that, but it's hard to believe it's been 10 years already.
Right. Excellent. So tell me some things you typically do when you arrive on deck before a game.
Yeah, so I think it kind of depends on where I am in the weekend or if it's a single game, right? So if it's the first game that I'm calling, and maybe it's the first game being called in that pool on the weekend, I'm certainly going to get on deck and early and make sure that everything's set up, right? I think one of the biggest things that I always try to do is make sure that the benches are pulled way back behind the goals as much as possible, right? Just to give coaches more space and get the players back away from you, especially down towards that end where there's a lot of interaction with the official. Also just checking the pool deck, making sure all the meter markers, are where they need to be and the goals are aligned, checking the balls, as well as talking to the table crew to make sure everybody's all set. Outside of that, it's some conversations with your partner, especially if it's somebody you haven't worked with a whole lot. If it's somebody you're on deck with that you've called a lot of games with, I think it's a little bit of a different conversation, kind of pregame, since you already know each other. But if it's an official I haven't worked with a whole lot, talking about pool coverage, things you like to look for, kind of how we're going to call the game and what you've seen throughout the year. So it's just trying to make sure you're prepared, everybody knows you're prepared, and you showing that confidence on the pool deck.
Excellent. So can you tell me a little bit more about that collaboration? Because I think for younger officials who are getting started, have done it for a couple of years, that that collaboration piece is really important. So you don't know somebody, you've never worked with them before. What does that conversation generally sound like?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different depending on whether you have a headset on or not, right? So there's been headsets introduced in the game, especially at the collegiate level. And even internationally lately. I was a little hesitant at first, to be honest, with the extra kind of chatter going on in your ear with everything else that you're already focused in on. But the more and more I've used them, the more and more I like them. So if I have a headset on, it's more about just talking through things. Usually if I'm the attacking referee, I like to kind of control what I'm not looking at. So if we're up on the kind of the 4 or 5 spot and the ball's going to 4 and I know I'm not handling it, that's where I can vocally say to my partner, take it, take it, take it. And you can be a little bit easier, obviously, with the headset. If I don't have a headset on, I personally like to use a little bit of hand signals, and I'll talk to my partner about that kind of before the game. So I think a lot of misstep there is on the 4-5 side. As well as if I'm the backcourt official kind of stepping down to take something. So those are kind of the two main pieces I talk about. So I'll say, if I'm not taking the 4 spot, I'll point down to that spot to say, hey, you take this, I'm not looking at it. And vice versa. If there's something as a backcourt official, if we have a double hole set or there's a strong move that way and I want it, I'll visually walk down the pool deck. So normally I'm up, at 6-7 meters, wherever the back line is. But I would walk all the way down to about 4 or 5 meters to show my partner, hey, I got this now. I'm walking towards this. There's other kind of stuff where I'll maybe do this to say, hey, I got it. So for me, it's more about setting up how I want to communicate during the game, and kind of what I like to focus on. But it's mainly always around kind of that 4 or 5 spot, whether I say, hey, if it's outside 5, you take it, or I'll point, or how we kind of communicate on those switches.
Right. Yeah. So it adds another layer to officiating, right? So you're not only looking at everything in the water, you're now, nonverbal communication with your partner. It seems.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be able to know where your partner is and understand where they're looking to. I mean, as you whistle more games and you work more with some officials that you called a lot of games with, I know where they're already looking. But when you're working with a new official and you're not quite sure, sometimes you need to spread out a little bit more, make sure you're communicating back and forth. And then it's also critical as the game's going on that those conversations are happening between periods, right? So it doesn't just happen before the game and that's it, and during the game, right? If something was missed in a period, you guys got to talk about it at the end of the quarter, or especially as a younger referee, if you have questions or should I have stepped down or things like that, that's the time to kind of talk to a more veteran official and talk through some of those pieces and kind of get that direct feedback right away.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you talked about, you graduated from Hopkins, going on 10 years now. You've worked, worked with the CWPA, you've worked club events, high school events. You get to know coaches and officials personally, former players, colleagues. How do you navigate those personal relationships you might have with former coaches and still remain professional, as an official?
Yeah, I've certainly experienced this, right? So as you said, I've called many high school games with coaches that have coached me. When I was reffing collegiately, I've reffed games with my former coach, Ted Bresnahan, on the pool deck. I think you have the conversation that you normally would, right? You're friends, you're jovial together, but they know based on kind of how you kind of communicate that once the whistle starts, it doesn't matter about a friendship, right? And I think people that know me, and it's about how you show yourself on the pool deck, know that that's going to be the case. So if the coach crosses a line, it doesn't matter to me whether I know that coach or I don't know the coach. I'm going to react the same way as I would, whether it's pulling a card, giving a warning, or anything like that. So for me, it's more about not treating anybody different just because I know them or who they are. I mean, I've reffed your games as a coach when you were at Villanova, right? Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing. We're friends, but we have the conversation. But once the game starts, that's it, and that's the line. You're a coach, I'm official, and I'll also say that to you. I won't say hey Damon or hey this. I would say hey coach, and reference them that way as well to show respect. But the line is what the line is.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great advice, definitely. So do you have some best practices you would suggest for officiating with experienced officials, but also kind of working with some novice officials? How do you make that a good environment for both both those types of officials you work with?
Yes, I mean, I've been very lucky, right? So I talked a little bit about Tom getting me into some really good situations. So when I first started officiating, I think he saw some promise in me, and he put me on some tournaments with a lot of veteran officials, guys like Alex Stankiewicz, Michael Goldenberg, Valvel Suchikov, people like that have been around the game for a while. And I was able to just kind of absorb what they were calling, and they were very open to me. And that's kind of how I am now as a more veteran official. Is that I'm always open to helping young officials. To be honest, I have seen young officials not want to take that advice. And if I feel that way, then I will stop giving advice to them if they don't feel like they want to take it. But for me, when I was coming up, I was always asking questions, always listening to what they were saying. And not only when I was calling games, but also when I was off, right? So a lot of these collegiate events, we're there for the weekend, right? We're calling 5-6 games, but there's 15, 20 games going on. So when I wasn't whistling, I was sitting on the pool deck watching the games and asking them questions, whether it was between quarters or after the games, why they called this a certain way or what they saw. And it just helped. It helped to watch more and more games, see how they were calling it, and then see how I can put it into my game. I think the other thing you can really learn from is, especially when you get to work with a lot of different officials, is you can kind of pick and choose little things that you like from some people. So, I've seen Mark Koganoff, for an example, throw a double exclusion and a double yellow card to a coach because of like a situation that really boiled up and was like, wow, that was okay. I got that kind of in my memory bank if I would ever need to pull that out, or things like that you can see how a veteran official handled something and it just calmed the situation down, or it was a really good call. You can kind of put that in your back of your head. You've seen that now, now if it comes up, can you react that same way if that's how you think it should be called?
Yeah, I think that's, I think that kind of holds true too. As you say that, I think about, well, I learned how to call a really good timeout from, I think, Alex, right? I like the way he, blows a timeout. So I was thinking, oh, okay, I can take that too and use that in my repertoire.
Yeah, exactly. Or even positioning,
Right.
you watch where this person is and they handled this that way and say, oh, okay, he looks like he had a good angle there and saw this that way. Or how Michael Goldenberg always just seems calm through everything he does. Nothing ever gets him up or down or things like that. There's little things that you learn from watching these guys over time and work with them a lot. And like I said, I like to kind of pick little things from here and there. You still got to be yourself. You can't just copy one person and call your game that way. You got to find your own game, but you can take a little things here and there and kind of build yourself up to a more experienced official.
Yeah, that's great. So, water polo obviously is really tough to play, really tough to coach, really tough to officiate. In your opinion, what's the most challenging part about officiating water polo and why?
Yeah, I think for me personally, it's the variety of levels we have in the U.S., right? I mean, we go from calling a age group game to a high school game to college games to international games, and even the college game has a lot of variety in the levels, right? And it's finding the balance, I would say, between the speed that happens in some of those games and what you need to do to kind of control the physicality. It's a very delicate balance of maybe blowing the whistle too much and influencing the game too much versus not blowing enough and the game gets out of control, whether that's through injuries or misconducts or things like that. So for me, it's always been with the levels kind of going back and forth and calling games throughout the year. It's just being ready. And as soon as you see that super fast game, a good, a Cal Stanford game or something like that you could get put on, that you can step up to that plate and call that game in control and all that stuff. So I think it's about, understanding the game you're in and how you need to apply yourself for that game versus kind of just, this is the way I call it and this is it, because not every game's the same. And especially when you go level to level, speed to speed, men's to a women's game, it's all different when you're on the pool deck.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a great answer, Josh. I think that's a really thoughtful way of thinking about, your approach to the game. So you talked about officiating a number of high-level games, whether it's high school, on the college level, on the club level. Can you think of a game that really stands out as memorable, good or bad, and why it stood out for you?
Yeah, it's a good question, Damon. I think it's easy to look at, the first of anything is kind of one that kind of comes to mind quickly, whether it was my first, Eastern Championship game, my first NC2As, my first international game. They all kind of stand out. But I guess in the last couple of years, I did the MPS invite last year in the men's season and called a game on that last day with Alex Stankiewicz. It was UCSD and UC Davis. And it was just it was a really fun game to be a part of. It was a challenging game, but it was one that we kind of had to go through our whole tool belt or toolkit, kind of as Bob Korb used to call it, in terms of yellow cards, red cards, misconducts, variety of different things. And, we handled it very well. Evaluations were very good. The game went into sudden death overtime. It was just one of those games that you got done, you felt really good about. The game was fun to call, even though it was high intensity. Like I said, there were red cards and misconducts and things like that. You called a game with a good partner, and the evaluations came out well. So that's kind of one that stands out lately, that I've called outside of kind of the first, like I talked about earlier.
Right. Cool. So I guess if my final question, if you would have to think back, looking back on some of the first games you might have done, in your career, and the knowledge you have now and the experience, would you go back and give yourself some pointers when you were just first starting out? Maybe things to focus on, things to avoid. Could you give your younger self some advice, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's about watching as much water polo as you can. The only way you're going to get better is to see more games called by high-level officials, and then put yourself in those situations. I think with anything in life, you got to challenge yourself. And, when we're there on a weekend, officiating championships, right, we're also battling for semifinals and finals and things like that. So you got to have the drive to get to where you want to be. And then when you get put in those situations, you got to perform. So for me, I think I would just tell myself to, I don't really have any regrets of kind of what I did or anything, or big pieces of advice. It would be, if I could, just to watch more games or do more as a younger official, especially when you're learning. Get in front of as much as you can, ask as many questions as you can, always be open to advice from people. And like I talked about earlier, just take pieces of information that you can from what you like and who you've talked through, and kind of keep those relationships going. Even with the veteran officials that I'm constantly working with, if I have a question about something in the games that I didn't call with them, we pick up the phone and talk through things. So, it's a great group of friends. It's a great sport to be involved in. And, I can't be happier to be calling water polo.
Yeah, I think you do a great job, Josh, and I really appreciate taking the time tonight, talking water polo. This has been Josh Kratz, our Behind the Whistle series. I'm Damon Newman. As always, check out our website, AmericanWaterPolo.org. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and other interviews and educational resources. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Damon.